Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. Today we are joined by Monica Knox. Monica, thanks for joining us today.
Hi, James. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to speak with you. And before we jump into the topics that we want to talk about, I was hoping you could tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am a California Bay Area native, which gets me in a lot of trouble being in Seattle and rooting for the 49ers. I started my career out in telecom. So it's kind of, a time where we were doing some really cool things in telecom that was kind of tech-ish like, and did a stint in entertainment, worked for PepsiCo, a CPG company, but then found my way back to tech. So, I've worked for a variety of companies, big companies like Sony, like Microsoft that you heard of, and smaller companies like Twitter, although that's considered a large tech company. And then most recently, LivePerson and Parity. So a variety of, mostly public, had a private experience, and typically global tech organizations that are growing.
Yeah, I think I've pretty much heard of every single company you worked for. So it's definitely really impressive. And I know that you have so much great insight to share with everybody today. So thanks again for being here. And I think, just to recap, we can start kind of big picture, kind of what you're seeing out there in terms of talent acquisition. And then we can maybe kind of hone in on some tactical things that leaders can be doing to achieve great results. But just at a high level, I would love to get your thoughts on what you're seeing in the talent acquisition recruiting kind of market right now, particularly within tech. What are you seeing out there? What trends are you seeing? Any insights that you could share with us would be super helpful.
Yeah, sure. Well, let me maybe set the context, a little more broadly, just in this whole space of talent, because I think that with the pandemic, it's a time that we've obviously never seen before that's put this interesting demand on the talent function. There are so many things happening in the world and, that we live in, and, we don't leave our experiences just outside of the doors of, the virtual doors of our companies, right? We bring them in with us. And so whether you're talking about, the Me Too movement, this recent Supreme Court leak about abortion rights, whether you're talking about Black Lives Matter, Asian hate crimes, mental health, the war in Ukraine, like there are so many things that people are emotionally dealing and struggling with. And when kind of these systems fail, right? The government, maybe we look for some solace in the government, but maybe look for solace in our communities. And we haven't been able to come together for the last 2 years until most recently. So even coming together with family has been challenging. Maybe we look for some solace within our church and faith. And again, challenges of coming together that may or may not work for us. And so what happens is we tend to take those needs that we have into our offices, into our employers. And all of a sudden, the role of HR has really evolved, and it's become not just about, running the business with a strategic mindset around talent. It's really helping people deal with real issues that they're bringing into the workplace that are having an impact on their productivity. And so it's the most challenging time, I think, that I've ever seen in my career to be in this function. And it's interesting that we're seeing people moving out of HR, like at an unprecedented rate, because it's just challenging. It's just hard. And leaders are looking up and they're saying, oh my gosh, if I haven't had a talent leader before, I really need one because I don't know how to manage through some of these issues. So, this is kind of the more broader context around kind of what's happening as relates to overall, people and talent and culture. More specifically, James, as it relates to your question with talent acquisition, because of, this environment we've been living in, and we've proven that we can actually do quite a few jobs remotely that perhaps we weren't sure we could do before, and do them quite well. It's really opened up the aperture for companies to look for talent, anywhere in the world, quite frankly. Very progressive companies are saying, hey, we might be sitting in Colorado, but if you live in Spain, that works for us, and vice versa. I'm seeing that. And so what it's done is just create this ultra competitive market One, it's competitive because now companies that may not have considered talent due to geography are rethinking that. And so they've just got more talent to consider. On the other hand, you've got, folks who have more options to think about. So, maybe in your local market, if the pickings are slim for what you want to do, you don't necessarily have to be limited to that. And so it gives the candidate a lot more options too. So it's a really insane time. And I have a feeling that, MBA programs and business schools around the country will be looking back and writing history books about it. Having said that, I don't think there's necessarily a book ending to this. I think that what we're experiencing is a shift, a real shift and evolution in business and talent. And I actually think it's for the better.
I think so too. And one of the points that you made was talking about how challenging it is to be in any type of people function, whether that be traditional, more so HR or talent acquisition. But it's a time to make a significant impact. It's a time where actually talent acquisition and people functions really matter and are being pushed front and center. So it's definitely, as you said, it's incredibly challenging. But really, I think that's going to be the difference for companies that win or lose and are able to really take advantage of growth opportunities over the next few years. I mean, and it's not just, small organizations making these shifts to remote. I mean, you see companies like Airbnb coming out saying that you can work from anywhere in the world. A lot of smaller companies were saying, hey, we did that 2 years ago. But
right. We've been doing that.
Right. The reason it's important is it shows that like bigger tech employers are recognizing the importance of a people first culture, and that we're kind of moving beyond a phase where companies can just provide that as kind of lip service, saying, hey, we actually care, we care about people, but then they have bad PTO policies, or they have a PTO policy but no minimum policy, or their capacity planning is totally out of whack, so people don't actually feel empowered to take time off. And
that's right.
I mean, you're starting to see a better alignment of people actually thinking about organizational structure and change from a people first perspective. And I think, the companies that are really achieving growth are obviously, they need people to fuel that growth. And hopefully we're starting to see more and more companies understand this. I mean, we are seeing more, but hopefully that trend is something that continues out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it's every company says we value our people. I mean, maybe there's somebody that says we don't value our people, but I haven't run into a company yet that says we don't value our people. Or, every company, people are greatest asset, right? It's kind of the oldest tagline that, we've heard of. But yet, kind of to your point, the operationalization of that is not aligned in a lot of cases. And so, people in my function in HR, we have to be really careful about the companies that we align ourselves with, because yes, this idea of being people first, is really now becoming like you don't have a alternative. Like there's a demand being placed, on businesses to evolve to be people first. And I think that's great. It's also putting a demand on the talent leaders to be creative, to be at the table, to lead, to take risks, to maybe do what's not the norm, because who knows what the norm is anymore. Right. A lot of us are asking each other, what are you doing? What are you doing? There isn't like this, kind of formula that says, 1 + 1 = 2, and this is what you do. This is how you do it. I still think we're living through this experiment of, whatever it is, hybrid work, remote work. And I think, again, to your point, for a lot of, smaller companies, tech companies in my industry, this isn't a new concept. But for other industries, I sit on the board of a healthcare organization. I mean, there's some jobs you can do remotely, and there's just some jobs impossible to do remote. And so how do you work through all of those things, even having a really clear set of criteria around what's remote and what's not? Because, there are a lot of people that ask to work remote. We have technology. If you are a receptionist, at a company, and your job is to greet people as they come into the door, you actually can do that remotely. Like there's technology that enables that, right? Now, from a cultural perspective, the business might say, well, we prefer not to do it. But what's happening is, I think, also the convergence of things like Zoom and Teams and really good technology solutions that enable us to be kind of anywhere in the world and still engaged. I mean, when I was at Microsoft, the last assignment that I had was leading HR for a division called Mixed Reality. And my goodness, I was sitting next to somebody in a room that was a hologram of them. So
Wow.
they were there. They weren't physical, but they were hologram. The technology exists where you can do that. And I've seen, companies that are moving into that space. And so with the convergence of technology and what we're able to do, it's driving some very interesting conversations with business leaders and talent leaders.
That's gonna be like the new version of hybrid work. It's like opposed to going in office 2 days a week, it's gonna be your hologram coming
That's
in
right.
twice a week. Like, all right, I'm not gonna be there, but
My hologram will be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
So is that a good middle ground? I mean, yeah, that's funny. So I'm kind of curious. I really want to get your take on the Great Resignation.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's become like a very buzzy term, and I was hoping to get your thoughts just based on your experience, the companies you've worked with. What is the data really showing behind the Great Resignation at this point in time?
Yeah, I think, I appreciate the question because, I think it's also the great reshuffle. That's another terminology that we've heard. But, if you look at pre-pandemic levels of, job changes and employment changes and the percent of maybe attrits that people had, and then comparing it to this time, that we've had for the last couple of years of the pandemic, you do see this shift, right, where a higher percentage of people are changing jobs. And yet there's also some data that suggests that that's not actually happening at the rate that maybe there's an assumption around. There's some questioning around, the data of what we're seeing. I think that it's important for companies to really look at their own data and identify whether, there really has been a shift in the attrition of their own companies versus kind of playing into this narrative that, we're hearing from this industry that says there's this, like 10x or 4x or 5x, whatever times people that are actually leaving companies. I do think that may be happening in pockets. I'm not sure it's happening, at every company. So, I just think that people need to be really focused in on their own data. Data can be challenging, right? Because, in some companies, data is clean. People, talent leaders are using it daily. And then in other cases, the data isn't clean. But, the other good thing, though, I think about this conversation around the Great Resignations is it's a challenge. Again, it's another demand in organizations, regardless of whether you're seeing huge spikes or not, to really think about, how do we retain our talent? Particularly with the diversity conversation, especially in tech, no surprise, tech is not an industry that's known for, exceedingly diverse teams and leadership teams. But, with the Great Resignation, I just think that it's important for people to look at their own data and to be creative and think about, okay, versus hiring, how do we retain? Like, if we could just retain the diverse talent that we have, what would be the huge shift that we would see versus having this focus on hiring? It's harder to retain. Hiring, it's easier. It's more transactional, and there's strategic work too, as well. But to retain means we're thinking about our managers, the quality of managers, right? Managers are the linchpin for any organization. We have to think about how we communicate to people. We have to think about how are we growing and developing our talent. People will leave companies even when they like the products and services and the mission and all of that. They like, even their leaders. But if they're not growing, if they don't feel that their skills are getting sharper every day, they're going to go someplace where they feel like they can develop. And so, we have to really, think about the whole retention aspect. And then on the recruiting side of it, I think one of the dynamics that I'm seeing is, in this competitive market, that regardless of all those other things I just mentioned, right? The mission, the vision, and again, I think development's an important part of that. But what I'm seeing is that candidates have a propensity to go to workplaces where they have relationships. When I was at a previous company, we were able to scale, our team, we tripled the number of folks within HR. Most of that was in recruiting at this crazy competitive time. And why? It was because, people knew me, people knew folks on my, directs team, and they were making decisions about who they wanted to work with from a values perspective. And this goes back to, manager capability, but really thinking about, who are folks within the organization that really have those broader networks, and not even just a network of people they work with, because we all can look at LinkedIn and we can say, oh, I have this many people that I'm connected to, but it's really thinking about followership, this another level of leadership. I think that's kind of, if I think about, kind of maybe kind of a ladder, if you will, or in my head, I'm, visualizing maybe a pyramid, kind of at the tip of that spear. As we think about levels of leadership, we see followership. And that's where people are so, they're so bought in to the values of the leader that they're willing to go where that leader is. That's where I think, and it's, it takes some time to get there. That's another level of leadership, and it takes a lot of training and work and development and all that. But I think if companies can get to that point and recognize that, you can cut through a lot of this competitive talent, issues. If they have good talent, they want to work with other good talent. And so that's another strategy. We talked about the retention, but it's another strategy on the recruiting side to really build teams quickly in this competitive environment.
Right. I mean, I think you're right. Like, just getting into the concept, as you put it earlier in the notes that you shared, was relationship-based recruiting, right? I mean, that is key. And there's a lot of people that come from the thought processes that they don't want to even hire, whether it be a VP of sales or VP of people ops or whatever it might be. They don't want to hire people that don't have strong networks and don't have a list of people that they can call on to scale out a team. I mean, that's definitely, and I do agree. Like, it's best case scenario. Like, if you can hire a company full of leaders that inspire people to come on board, that's definitely, it's super helpful. What I would say is so if we wanted to think about how to put process around this for organizations that maybe they want to develop, they want to help their leaders develop, is there a way? Like, I mean, I suppose one thing that leaders can be doing is obviously like publishing content on LinkedIn. They can be taking different speaking engagements. There's ways that they can build those networks and potentially strong relationships to add to their team, even if they don't have 4 companies that they worked for previously that they can pull relationships from. There's probably other ways that they can develop that. And do you think that organizations should help leaders put more of an emphasis on, hey, what are you doing to strengthen relationships, kind of strengthen your own kind of personal brand, if you will, so that you can constantly have, to some extent, a funnel of top talent readily available for you? Do you feel like that should be a bigger focus that organizations make to help their leaders?
Yeah, well, I think it's really 2 things. I think, the answer to the question is yes. I think it's 2 things. I think one is, building your networks, right? And to your point, you can easily do that on LinkedIn. You can go to LinkedIn webinars. You can post content. You can get connected to groups and have a voice there. Like, if it's a group that's, and I encourage people to think about groups different than their own community, right? If you are not a part of the LGBT community, then get connected to a group that is, to expand your network, or, a gender that's not your gender, or, ethnic group, or other, disability, like other experiences that people are having that you can learn from. So I think it's kind of a 2-way thing, right? Because the more you get connected to broader networks, the more you're going to get a different perspective and learn and grow as a leader. And I always advocate for that. And I think that's a full-time job. I think you should always be doing that. I think this thing about building your personal brand, I would say it starts at home. Start with your own company. I don't know that you have to necessarily, you can do that on LinkedIn for sure. But I think you want to start where you are, because, followership starts with people being bought into your values, being bought into you as a leader. And, the people you work with every day, regardless of whether you have a management job where you have people reporting into you, or you're just working with colleagues, they will experience you in some kinds of ways. And I think it's also just being true to yourself, right? You don't want to create some persona that's not really you. But look, you were hired at your company because you have a set of skills, but also you have a value set that people felt that was an add to the culture. And so start where you are and just be consistent, be intentional. Also, I think it's important as a leader to understand who is it that you're working with. At Microsoft, we started doing, which is where I was when the pandemic hit, check-ins. Like, you might spend 15 minutes, 10 minutes maybe, or 15 minutes, maybe, or 5 minutes, whatever it is, just to say, hey, how are you doing? That simple question can open up, so many other kind of conversations around really what's going on in people's lives. And when you can really tap into real human and personal experiences, because look, you can say all day that business is not personal, but it is. It's very personal.
I never understood that. Would people, honestly, like, would people would say, oh, it's business? I was like, what do you mean? Like, this is how we're spending, like, 40, like the majority of what my week is working and with my colleagues and my clients. Like, it feels pretty personal.
Feels pretty personal, right? And to the extent that you develop those connections with people, and then, you add on top of that, the way that you're working and you're getting some good results and you're bringing people along, that's how you develop, followership. So I would say, start where you are and wherever you are. And it doesn't even have to be in a, it could be in a volunteer setting as well. Just be thoughtful about the people that are around you and really be thinking about their needs and, providing clarity for them, understand their goals. I think it's fascinating how, many managers, if you talk to and were to ask, what is it that each of your direct reports, what are their goals? What are they trying to do in the next year or two? A lot of managers, at least in my experience, say, I don't know, we've never had that conversation. But it means so much, for a manager to say, I really just want to understand, what is it that's important to you? What do you want to do in your career? Or even personally, how can I be helpful? Then you start to really tap into, again, that human side. And then think about that in the course of the work, right? Because let's say you have someone, I want to publish a book about, X, Y, or Z. You know what? I know of a publisher. Why don't you talk to this person to just start getting some information? That stickiness at a real human level that I believe starts the whole process of followership.
Right. And so what's really interesting about that too, is I think a lot of companies, particularly at the scale that you've worked with in the past, everything is focused on, process and operations and scale and how do we move faster and how do we go bigger and how do we leverage our time more effectively. And what's interesting is that it's, regardless of what stage of growth my own company's at or with my clients, it always, so many things come back to the relationship human level, where there are just some things that you don't necessarily want to scale. It doesn't make sense to scale. Like, you can't have a deep relationship with 100,000 people on LinkedIn. I mean, maybe sure, you can develop a following for sure, and that brand can be valuable and it can help with talent acquisition. But as you just said, I mean, the real, like, relationship first approach, it's like in HR, there's not to say that there's anything wrong with surveys, right? I mean, that those can still be valuable, but when you really get in there and have conversations with your people, that's where you're going to really learn a lot of the most valuable insights and feedback. And I think whether it's, it's more of an HR focus or talent acquisition or professional development or, one-on-one setting between a manager and employee, like, really diving into those conversations is where most of the value can be found for everybody. So it's interesting because in a lot of the most high level successful people that I speak with across, it could be CPO, COO, CEOs, or just, function level executives, like maybe like a VP of sales or talent acquisition. They all really do point back to, like, of course, yes, like, I need to understand operationally how to scale my function. And at the same time, I can never lose my pulse on the relationships and and it, like the people that seem to be the most successful that I've spoken with, that's a very consistent message. It's like, yes, scale, yes to process, yes to all of that, optimizing and iterating and testing and all of that. But there's that fundamental piece where it's like, I still have to be able to, virtually or in person, talk with my team and really get into
Yeah.
it and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, one of the things that I did, when as a live person, for that very reason, I started these small group, we call them culture chats. And, we just sat down with like 5 or 6 people every week. And we just had a conversation, we didn't have a big agenda and here's the things we're going to talk about. And they were so valuable. And we identified like talent through that. I mean, our employer brand leader was a part of those, and we featured some of our employees and different campaigns, and we were able to pull them in for different projects and things like that. But it didn't start out with that. It started out with really just understanding what was the pulse of the organization. And it always took a different path. None of these small group meetings were the same. But over time we were able to talk to like half of the company by just simply being consistent. Sometimes we had, 2 or 3 a week. Sometimes they were larger. They may have been 8 to 10 people. But the point was to keep them relatively small so that you could have some level of intimacy and talk about the things that were really important. Sometimes they were women. Sometimes they were, it was our Australia group, people that sit in a particular geography, people who were, newly hired. So that's, or people who've been at the company for 10 years, right? So, there are ways to do that, but I would agree that it's so important to stay connected. And it's hard as a leader, right? Because, I'm thinking about, my client group at Microsoft of thousands of people, you're not going to have one-on-ones. But however you do it, I mean, that was just what I described as an example of one way, but, thinking about how do we use technology as well, I think is really important for leaders to prioritize.
100%. I couldn't agree more with you there. And as we're coming up on time, we have about 5 minutes left today. I wanted to touch on one of the last topics that we had discussed potentially bringing up today, and it was about how to think about ex-employees and potentially the full kind of employee life cycle, if you will, which I think at most organizations kind of ends when employment ends. But
Yeah.
some of the higher level people that I've been speaking with, they view it a little bit differently, and I'm kind of curious to figure out how you view how that relationship can continue and how we should be thinking about essentially the alumni that pass through our organization and move on. I mean, how are you thinking about that employee life cycle?
Yeah, I mean, given what we're experiencing now, and also I would even say prior to the pandemic, it's very common, in Silicon Valley tech, you work for a place for 2 years and move on a year, 3 years, In fact, it's kind of a joke if you stay too long. Oh my God, you're here for 4 years. What's wrong? Can't you find another job? So, it kind of sounds a little different for people in other industries. But the point is that every company, you keep going, you're going to have people who've worked there and who've left. And, there is a mentality I've seen where it's like, okay, you've left, you're dead to me, I've seen that a lot. But then I think it's with what we're experiencing, it's smart to just rethink the way we see people that come and go in the organization. One of the things we see, like at Microsoft, we had a ton of boomerangs, people that left and came back. So you just never know. You never know when the person may leave and develop new skills in other places and then come back more valuable. Or sometimes you might see, these folks who leave start their own businesses. Is there a partnership there? Potentially, could they be a customer of yours, or a place or a community that you can go and get feedback on new products or services because they work there and they cared, about the company, probably still do, and probably still have maintained relationships. So, this idea that these, when people leave the company, it's just this transactional experience, they're here and then they're gone. I think we need to think about it more in an ecosystem. Those same people may be referring candidates to work for your company. And so how do you think about the ecosystem in a way that will help you, get information, get connected, that expands and broadens your network, and potentially who knows, maybe some of those folks will come back, stronger, smarter, more experienced, that can help you grow. So I just think that, rethinking that idea of alumni, or just that idea of alumni and what that means, is a smart strategy for businesses.
So one thing that I've been thinking through a little bit, and Secure Vision is probably still a little bit too small for this, but I was just kind of like mulling around in my head, just how would it work? Like if there was maybe some kind of official alumni group, right? That where it's like sponsored by the organization, right? And there's some kind of level of perks to being part of the group. And it basically just keeps people that, people connected that at one point had worked for a certain organization. And as kind of like a networking opportunity, as well as just a shared resource pool. Maybe there's like access to certain benefits, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I haven't really fleshed it out completely, but I think that there might be something there.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know if you've ever heard of something like that, but
yeah, well, some companies have that. Some companies, definitely already have that. I mean, and I think, even on LinkedIn, you'll find, alumni groups of different companies. I know I'm involved in a number of them, and even just that is very helpful. But then you'll see some organizations that actually organize their alumni community. But of course, it may take some resources, like it may take some people dedicated to kind of, shepherding that community and building it up. But whether it's, formal or informal, I definitely think there's it's worthwhile to figure out how to leverage that alumni community. And look, everybody that leaves a company is not going to want to stay connected to it. Maybe they left, they left and they weren't happy about something. That can change over time too, right? They may have left unhappy, got a perspective, and maybe, will come around over time to really want to help and support the company. So I think organizing in some kind of way makes a lot of sense.
Sure, definitely. Well, this has been a lot of fun, and I feel like we could keep going for quite a while and just riff back and forth on a lot of different experiences. So if you're open to it, maybe we could continue the conversation sometime in the next few months, 3 to 6 months, and we could do this again. But anyways, Monica, I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a blast.
Thank you, James. It was great to be here.
And I guess real quick, actually, before we jump off, if people want to follow you online, where's the best place to find you?
Professionally, the best place is LinkedIn. So you can find me there, and shout out, say hi. If you want to connect, DM me as well.
Great. Well, everybody that's tuning in, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next time.